Hello and welcome. It's what is it? Thursday afternoon, and I'm delighted to be joined by Wendy Whitaker-Large. This is actually Wendy's show, and we're doing it right now. So over to you.
Well, David, I have to say thank you, a big thank you to you for sorting out the technology on this one, because my streaming system wasn't working very well, so I've jumped onto yours. But really, I should be inviting you as my guest today, and I would be obviously delighted at some point to return the favour. But I first of all, just briefly introduce myself. My name is Wendy. If you haven't come across me before, my main thrust in property investing is to help people become financially free through investing in houses of multiple occupation. I think if I went on Mastermind and they asked me what my specialist subject would be, that would be my specialist subject, HMOs. But I do invest in buy-to-lets and commercial property as well. So in the world of investing, I've met very many interesting people along my journey, and none other than David, who has been somebody I sort of stumbled upon a few years ago, and somebody who piqued my interest even at that early stage because of his content, his approach, and his experience. So David, perhaps for people who don't know you, would you mind giving yourself a brief introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Well, I've been in property now for getting on for 40 years. Not quite 40, but it's 40 in a year or two's time. And in that time, I haven't done exciting stuff. I'm a kind of quite a boring fella, really. I do, the vanilla stuff and just rinse and repeat. And that ticks the boxes for me. I do have something of an understanding of how property cycles work and when to do what and that kind of thing. And I enjoy what I do. I'm a great believer that in any work, in anything you're doing, if you're not enjoying it, then you should switch to something else, because then it doesn't become work. And I'm happy to get a phone call at 3 a.m. about something or other, because I live and breathe property.
That's fantastic. And with your years of experience, you have obviously seen many different challenges and changes in terms of property cycles, property prices, economic policy, and I suppose global economics as well. And I'm sure that you'd agree that we are in a very unusual time right now because of coronavirus, the impact that's had across the world. And for us, I think as UK property investors, we can often look at our investments as being very, very local. Most people invest in maybe one or two, maybe three different locations, generally within England, possibly in the UK, and possibly having properties further afield. But I think that for many people, we're often very English focused, we're England focused, but this coronavirus has, of course, affected the whole world and the global economy, which I'm very interested in. I'm fascinated in to see how this is going to play out. So if I could start maybe by asking you, David, what are your thoughts about how coronavirus long-term might affect the property market in the UK?
I don't think long term it will, to be honest. So that's kind of the good news, I guess. Although there are one or two provisos to that, which we'll get to in a moment. But this was a short, sharp shock. Nobody in government or anywhere expected it to be over in 3 weeks when they announced the lockdown in March. It's just a matter of it takes 18. Even if you get rid of all the bureaucracy, it takes 18 months to develop an effective vaccine to something. There are 300 vaccine candidates to this nasty bug. 30 of them are in stage 3 trials. We have to inject a few, say 10, 20, 30,000 people with this to make sure, A, that the vaccine works, and B, that the side effects to the vaccine aren't worse than the thing that it's trying to prevent. So that's what we're kind of waiting for. And financial markets kind of factored in early summer that they were factoring in this all being over by about now, which was never going to happen realistically. But as long as we wear our masks, wash our hands, and stay 2 meters apart, I'm a great believer in those three things. We'll be fine until the old vaccine comes along. Apropos property, specifically in the UK, we were all cooped up, weren't we, and going absolutely bananas, doolally, over March, April, May, whatever. And so when the floodgates were opened, really, it's that, isn't it? When we were released out, there was a flurry of people wanting to buy property. It was a bit like the kind of the delayed spring boost that property gets every year, but it was manic. and a lot of property got sold, but it was short-lived, because then people thought, well, hang on, I'll have to pay back my bounce back loan, and hang on, when furlough ends up, am I still going to have my job? So we've already started now, although it hasn't been reflected in the figures, but I can tell you absolutely that we've started the sort of temporary downturn. But this is an 18-year property cycle compressed into, if you like, 18 months.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the turmoil that COVID has presented has also had a very big effect on lending. It's obviously reduced interest rates across the world. So this has also had knock-on effects. And I think that what we're seeing right now, as you say, is the sort of tail end of maybe the boost that happened because of the removal of stamp duty on properties up to £500,000. And I think, as you say, a lot of pent-up demand already there, and people going out and thinking, okay, right, now's my opportunity. Now I've got some freedom, I can go out and buy property. So we've obviously seen that happening. However, we've also seen tightening of lending to first-time buyers. And again, I'd like to get your reflections on that, David. What do you think? How do first-time buyers affect the property market?
That's a very, very good question, Wendy, and it's all down to that thing of chains in property, whereby I'm selling, hypothetically, because I don't own one, but my £2 million penthouse or whatever overlooking Hyde Park, which would probably be £20 million, wouldn't it? And then all the way down the chain, we get down to this I don't know, £70,000 flat in Putney. That's probably a bit underpriced as well. And then the flat at the bottom falls over. In estate agent parlance, they call it falling out of bed. And so this guy right at the top, or the people near the top of this chain are going absolutely mental about this. And what often happens is the guy at the top will buy the flat at the bottom, and then everything kicks in. Or as property investors, sometimes, as you know, we come into the middle of that chain and we do what we call a chain buster, where we buy at a discount some property in the middle of the chain, and we ask all the people in the chain to make a contribution as well, which brings the price down still further. That's today's tip of the day. So you know, that's the situation kind of that we're facing. And if first-time buyers find it much harder, and you know, back in my day, I mean, 10 years before I started investing, I'll tell you about my first ever flat. I bought it for £28,000. And this is a 2-bedroom flat overlooking a park in Zone 2. And I was very peeved that this was 1985. I was very peeved that in 1975 it had been sold for £10,000. I thought, oh, it would be like 450, $500,000, whatever. So it is much. The earnings multiples that first-time buyers need in order to be able to buy things have got insane. When I started, it was about 2.5 times salary, which is okay. And people have got round that. Certainly, developers have got around this with these shared ownership schemes, which are not very good when the first-time buyer comes to trade up, because they find then that they haven't got all the equity to move into the next one that they thought they had, because some of it belongs to the developer. And so that's an issue for people moving forward. And then if it's not from a developer, if you're buying from a private person or whatever, you know, you're equally in trouble. You've got Help to Buy again, which is. These help people to get on the ladder, but they don't help them to move up the ladder. And what the banks are doing at the moment as well is not helping matters. And this is not going to grease the wheels moving forward. The government's taken a huge hit by doing this thing with stamp duty, and it would have been nice if the banks had continued in the same vein, really.
So tell me a little bit more about your views about what's going on with the banking sector, and I suppose with central banks as well. It's difficult for them as it is for all of us, because there's no template to follow. I mean, when this started, I looked at what happened during Spanish flu, but that was like 100 years ago. And then we weren't really a nation of homeowners. Most people were renters, and then most of the workforce were dead. To be honest, it was a really nasty, vicious thing. So we can't draw parallels for that. I then look back to the days of bubonic plague. We can't really draw any inferences from that, because everybody was, I don't know, trading bags of grain or something, and going to work on ponies or
So we are in very difficult territory here. I mean, the Bank of England makes various forecasts, and even the bank, traditionally the mainstay of the whole sort of economic thing, they have admitted that their projections are kind of way out there. It's like pulling things out of the air. We don't really know how it's going to pan out. When the economy in a single quarter takes more than a 20% hit to the GDP, this is unprecedented. It's the first time ever, and it might be reasonable to assume that it's all going to bounce back, but not necessarily. And there are certain sectors that have taken obviously big hits, and aviation and the service industries, hotels and restaurants and pubs and all this kind of thing. But if you think about it, that all the people who work in these, and the banks quite early on took a view about this with mortgage lending as well, and that if you're an airline pilot or a Michelin chef or something, they're going to be less likely to lend to you on income multiples that they would take for other professions. But if you think about it as well, these guys from these other professions, they're also customers of the hairdressers and the other places, or the online retailing, or the grocery shops or something. So their spend is going to contract. So overall, the economy contracts, and then we've got businesses who might not be able to pay back those bounce back loans, which basically they just use them to stay afloat. And now they have definitely fewer customers than they did, and higher bills due to the repayment of loans. The furloughed staff, I mean, my betting is, and you can't blame them, that all the employers in March of 2020 would have sat down and said, right, let's have a list of all the people we've furloughed. What do they actually do? Do we need them in September, October, November, or whenever the scheme is going to end? So we're going to see redundancies as well. So in that sense, the economy will be taking more of a hit perhaps than we anticipated when all this started. But in a good way, there isn't anything fundamentally wrong with the economy. So it will be possible to all bounce back again in the other sense of bounce back.
I think that one of the areas that we perhaps haven't seen a lot of government intervention in just yet, but I think it is coming, is helping people who want to start a business. And, we've seen some help for younger unemployed people who are more likely to remain unemployed for a long time once they come off furlough, or even currently because they maybe haven't gone to university. And that group of young people, sort of between age about 16 to 24, who are deemed to be the most at risk of long-term unemployment, we've obviously got the Quick Start scheme. I think it's called Quick Start scheme, which has been introduced. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that there are skills that as a business owner or an employer that you can pass down. And of course, the government are generous in terms of funding those positions. Then the second measures, if you like, they brought in the other day, they announced, was to do with adult education, adult learning. Again, I'm massively in favour of that, because I think that we underestimate how much we carry on learning after 18. We tend to think, our education is done between 5 and 18. Well, actually, I just don't believe that. I've learned a lot more as an adult that's actually been more applicable to my life, that's made a difference to my life than, the geography of the sort of Outer Hebrides that I might have learned at the age of 12 or whatever I was learning then. There may be interesting things to learn, but how valuable they are long term in terms of skills and applicable knowledge is questionable, I think. So for me, the government putting some oomph behind adult learning is really, really good news. And I'm again, really interested to see how that pans out. I was listening to a debate actually the other day on the radio where they were talking to a couple of employers who work in the construction industry. And these construction employers were saying how hard it has been recently to get brickies, to get electricians, to get jobbing plumbers, not people who are running their own business, but maybe they're in their early 20s, they've come out of college. And they said, employing people who've got the right attitude and the right approach is really a challenge. And there's so few of these people around that we kind of have to take what we can get, what we can find. But actually, the competition is not there. And, I think this is, of course, having a massive impact on the wider housing economy, we know that there aren't enough houses being built. And during lockdown, where we live, there were 3 housing developments that all basically froze. No work was done for probably 4 months on those housing development sites. Now, that in itself has a very big knock-on effect in terms of jobs, in terms of labour, in terms of pent-up demand as well, and in terms of house prices. So I think that this is a really good thing the government's going to do. But the other thing that I'm kind of interested to see if it does happen, and we haven't yet seen this, but I might write to Rishi. Rishi gets a regular supply of letters from this household. So probably another one won't matter. But is the idea of helping people start a business. Because for me, it's businesses that make the economy go round. Now, David, I've said a lot, and I'm supposed to be interviewing you here. Apologies.
No. This is a chat, and that's as it should be. A couple of things I'll pick up on. Number one, we are starting from a better place apropos adult education than when I was a kid, because I came across a couple of days ago on YouTube a video of a BBC TV series which was called On the Move. And it was a kind of late night TV show, and it had people who went on to become mega famous in it, like a very, very young Bob Hoskins. It had Martin Shaw, aka Judge Don Deeds, and all these kind of people playing bit parts really when they were unknowns, and like sitting around. And this was to promote adult literacy, because there were a serious number of people who couldn't even read, and it was kind of the shame of it and all that. And they're all sitting around in this cafe going, coffee. And quite a very patronizing thing, yeah, but a reflection of how it was then. So we're in a much better place as far as that's concerned. But you're right that entrepreneurs and businesses, and in particular small businesses, are the lubrication that keeps society going. We need this. We need to sort of underpin this. We need to be aware that so many of these people will go under. Good entrepreneurs bounce back. I mean, the key to being a success in this life is if you're sticking your neck out, you're going to get some hits, but it's making a good recovery and landing in a better place than you were before. I'm a great fan of this saying, fall down 7 times and stand up 8. And that's certainly been the story of my life thus far. And if you look at things like, well, let's look at the American railroad system, or indeed the Channel Tunnel, or all these kind of things. These were built with masses of investor money, and due to the huge sums that were put in to develop this infrastructure, they could never have been profitable. So the original companies go bust, other investors buy in at 10p in the pound or something, and suddenly you've got a business. And this is the way that sort of things happen. Let's look at Japan, which is a very good case in point. Japan had all these, after the boom of the 80s, they had all these ghost companies, which were just sort of being kept alive. They were just barely being kept alive. Their trading income was barely enough to support the massive interest payments they had after all the restructuring and buyouts and this kind of thing. And they should really have been polished off. They should have been had a merciful killing, and then they would have been new shoots would have sprung up like the phoenix, would have been much more profitable, and it would have pushed the economy forward. So that may be the thing that we'll see in Q4 2020, Q1, Q2 21. We might see some companies folding, and the buildings from which they operated will still be there. The infrastructure they used will still be there. There was a company on the internet, I don't know if you're probably not old enough to remember boo.com. That was a major fashion retailer that BOO came around at about the turn of the millennium, and they had some wonderful tech. And so all their investors would go into the offices and see it was a clothes retailer, so you could rotate the clothes like that and zoom in and out and all this kind of stuff. But we were all at home, probably you as well. We were on 28k modems, and they were seeing this on this broadband connection, fantastic, and it wouldn't work for anybody at home, so it all went bust. But a lot of the tech that now powers our e-commerce was licensed from, it was picked out by the receivers from that thing and sold on all the IP for that. So good comes out of bad. That's what I'm saying here.
And I would agree. And I think that, a healthy economic cycle, we'll come on to the property cycle, but the healthy economic cycle, unfortunately, it does have boom and bust. And we don't like to consider bust. We want to have boom times all the time. But actually, in an economy which, is based on principles of supply and demand, and the best price analogy. You cannot, unfortunately, have summer all year round. Winter is going to come. Contraction is going to come. People, unfortunately, sadly, will lose their jobs. Now, obviously, this has been brought about by COVID, which has been, a really sort of phenomenal event, which nobody could have really predicted. However, there are many companies, even listed on the stock exchange right now, that are very seriously overvalued compared to the profits that they're making. And I do wonder whether, we might see some of that happening. In fact, even already now, the FTSE is coming down gradually, and we may see some, changes to the stock market as a result of that. And I think it's very interesting to see what how far does your money go these days. And of course, the reason why, in the past, we might have had some really good returns on the stock market, and people have often said, well, why do you invest in property? Because look at what I'm getting out my stocks and shares. Well, the reason why I invest in property, I do actually invest in the stock market as well. But the reason I invest in property is because actually I can go and touch it and feel it and see it. And it's a real thing. It's an asset. And it provides a service. And one of the issues that I have with some of the companies that are listed on the stock exchange is that many of them are almost intangible. What do I get actually as a shareholder? What does that company offer to the market? And the wonderful, it may feel very basic, it may feel very unexciting, and in many ways it is, but it's a human need for shelter, for housing. And as a property investor, as somebody who invests in bricks and mortar, I believe that actually I'm investing in people's lives as well. So it brings a bit of added meaning to me, being in this industry.
Yes, my good friend Steve Mitchell doesn't talk about the people who live in his houses as tenants. He talks about them as customers, and I think that's the way to look at this. That we are providing a much needed service. I mean, what do people need? They need food, water, air to breathe, and a roof over their heads. So these are the fundamental things, and they're going to be needed come rain or shine always. Some fancy high tech stock will be here today and gone tomorrow, and some kind of dinosauric company that's been around since Victorian times might not be here next year. But these are a universal constants that fulfill people's basic day-to-day needs, and I think that's something we can be proud of.
So, David, when we come to think about property cycles, which has been something you've studied and elucidated to many people, and you've illuminated the whole topic for a lot of people, I think, very helpfully. What's your take on what's happening now? Do we just see this pandemic as a black swan event that could never have been predicted, and everything's going to go back to normal? Do you think there's going to be some opportunities coming through? How do you see that being kind of shaped as we move forward?
Well, that's very interesting, Wendy, because at the end of last year, I think it was November, I hosted an event in London. It was a one-off, and I found some very good friends from the property world that I'm sure you'll be aware of, some really real heavyweight big hitters. Ranjan Bhattacharya came along on my panel, John Corey came along on my panel, Fiona Talbot was on the panel, Andrew Roberts and myself. And we all spent about 20 minutes.
You definitely have another woman on that panel, David.
The next one, you're going to be there. That's a promise. That'll be in 2021, I think. And we all gave our in-depth insights and our thoughts as to what was going to happen. And we thought long and hard about it, all of us. And we all made some predictions, which turned out to be total nonsense. Had COVID not come along, I think all of what we said would have happened. So as far as the property cycle is concerned, and yes, I have studied this almost obsessively to the point where, because I got a bit caught out by the first property cycle I was in, that was 1990, I think, and there was Nigella Lawson's dad, Nigel, was Chancellor of the Exchequer. Isn't that an amazing thing? And you can see the family likeness. He abolished a thing called MIRAS, which was where you and I, if we were just friends, could buy a property together and we would both get interest relief against our salaries apropos the mortgage payments. And what a wonderful, beautiful thing. And about 6 months in advance, Nigel Lawson announced that this was going to be abolished, the double relief. So everybody rushed to buy properties. I had a property, and I was sitting pretty. And this is the one I told you about that I'd spent. It had cost me, well, to be precise, 27. You always remember your first property and where it is and how much it cost. It cost me £27,750 sterling, 28 to round numbers, and I got offered cash 82 if I could complete before this deadline. So just flicking the numbers around. So tripling my money in 3.5 years in property. So that's insane. I, being green and thinking more about my day job than this, I just thought, oh, property obviously triples every 2 or 3 years. It must be something that happens. So I turned this down. And then I started seeing on the news all the gloom and doom after this deadline had passed. And suddenly nobody wanted to buy property anymore. So I thought, oh my God. So I was going around to my friends, that offer had evaporated. And I was going around to my friends, want to buy a property, I had an offer of 50. So I just decided to keep it. And that was the best thing I ever did, because otherwise I'd be a taxi driver now, driving around telling people, don't do property. I tried it once and it doesn't work. So I learned from that lesson. And what I should have actually done, and this is kind of relevant today in a sense, is I should have sold that property for 50, and I could have used the money that I had released to buy 4 houses. I could use it as a deposit for 4 houses. Those 4 houses today would be worth about 800 each. But there you go. A missed opportunity. But moving on, I'm a slow learner, so it took me a long time for that lesson to sink in. But then when 2007 came around, I knew what to do. So I was selling a few things for basically, it was a half price sale on some stuff. I was selling stuff at very close to half price. So I had stuff that had been priced, which I could have easily got 309, 390, 400, say, for in 2005-06. And I was selling it for about 2.5, 2.10, stuff like that. And I was then buying stuff. So it was okay. So I didn't take the CGT hit. I saved a fortune in stamp. And I got some wonderful discounts that worked for me. So where do we find ourselves now? Well, the government clearly thought that this was all going to bomb out this month. That was what, and they're smart fellas there. They've got a lot of civil servants to help them, and blah blah blah. They see the calculations we don't. And then Rishi Sunak made the same mistake. The mistake that Osborne made when he added the 3% stamp by announcing it in advance. So Sunak announces, hey, do you know, guys, from October, we're not going to have any stamp. And somebody then had a word with him. Rishi, what do you think that's going to do to the market between now and then? He goes, duh. And so the stamp came off immediately, and thereby avoiding, what's happened twice before. Because 3 years ago, whenever it was with that stamp duty 3% hike, people were paying £10,000 more for a property to save £3,000 in tax. It is insane. Yeah. And so they had to do this thing, but the downside, it was just imbecilic to we got a very, very fine chancellor, but it wasn't a wise move to announce it in advance. And so the sting of that, all he's done is he's shifted the demand into July, and now it's petered out. It really has. I mean, I spend a lot of time listening to what's going on the ground. It's over. That boom is over. And properties now, if you spend some time looking at all the sort of boom, the affluent areas, the Cambridges, the Oxfords, the good parts of London, you'll see properties on there that have had maybe 100 grand knocked off the price and have been sitting there for a long, long time and will continue to sit there. So that's over. And so we're not quite at the buying point yet, but there's usually a lag. This is another thing. There's usually a lag between vendors realizing the market's bombed and adjusting their prices accordingly. And most of them think that conservatory cost me 30 grand, so I'll add that onto what I thought I was going to make, and that's the price, take it or leave it. And people will say, well, you know what, I'll leave it because that one down the road is better and half the price. And this war kind of starts out at the start of these property crashes, and we're seeing this where this one person in the street, their nerve isn't steady. I mean, it might be a probate, it might be a divorce, there might be the person might be struggling financially, there might be a reason why this property has to be sold, and in order to sell it, they slash that price. And that's the beginning of that downward spiral, because then nobody, when we talk about, it's wrong to talk about below market value, because what the last property in that street sold for, that defines the market value. So as soon as somebody's nerve cracks, like in a game of poker, that's it, downward spiral. And that has now 100%, no question about it, started in property in all the sort of affluent areas. It's happened. in a lot of the affluent areas, people then pull back. They say, well, you know what? I don't have to sell. I'll just keep it for 4 years or something. That happens. So supply reduces. But if people wanted to make a sale now, I mean, you know, whoever's watching, check this out in whatever area, in the area where you're living, and do a bit of research on Rightmove. I've looked at least a dozen areas that I watch, and this is happening. And you know, the denials by the estate agents just make it worse, really. But it's not a problem, because you know, you'll then be able to, you might have sold, and I'm not offering advice to sell your property at 50% off, so let's be quite clear about this. But if you are able to free up some cash, you'll maybe get 60% off if you know how to negotiate off the thing you're buying. And you know, there will be deep bargains to be had. Was it the bank? I think it was the Bank of England that predicted a 16% cut. But for the savvy investors who know how to negotiate, they'll get much deeper discounts.
Yes. So I think there are absolutely some opportunities ahead. I think it's a case of holding your nerve, because we're all influenced by the society in which we live, aren't we? And sometimes that's the media, sometimes that is, you know, people that we live with, people that we mix with. And the challenge is that what we've got to do, I think, is keep our nerve and stick to sometimes a bit of a kind of a belief system that is based on facts and data, rather than what everybody else is doing. And it's very interesting what you say about what you've been looking at, some of these higher affluent areas, because certainly in my experience, living in the northwest of the UK, certainly over the summer, as soon as that stamp duty relief was announced, we saw prices go up by the same value by which you would have saved the stamp duty, which seemed rather ironic to me. So, you know, you look at the price of a house and you think, well, actually pre-COVID, it would have been worth, say, 500,000, or let's say 400,000. Add on the stamp duty, which maybe would be 12,000, maybe 16,000. Oh, now that house is actually up for sale for 420,000. So you're still paying the money, but it's not going to the exchequer anymore, which does actually give me a little bit more satisfaction. However, as we know, particularly if you are, say, a second-time buyer, or you're upgrading, or you may be downsizing, property values are very much like having a boat on a river. As the river levels go up, you don't actually really make any more money, because you may have to go up by that amount to get a slightly bigger or a better house. And then when they come down again, you haven't necessarily lost money, because it depends what you're going to next. They're all relative to one another. But there is, I do believe, a ripple effect across the UK. And we tend to see this happening. You've been watching some of the bigger cities. I tend to watch the northwest of the UK, because that's where we invest, and where quite a few of my clients invest. So it's very interesting to see that sort of hump in the market has happened. And now what we're seeing is properties languishing on the market. Ones that were maybe on the market before COVID and still haven't sold are absolutely sitting there. And they haven't had that kind of boost of being fresh on the market, where you get new views and new people viewing, which sometimes helps to sell a property, because it's brand new and everyone gets excited about it. And I think absolutely it's about getting ready to buy. And of course, the one thing, when we start to hear words like recession or depression, and we understand that, you know, interest rates are very, very low, which is a good thing for borrowing, but it's a worry if you're a saver, if you've got money in the bank. This can cause people to feel fear. And so therefore they pull their horns in and they decide, oh, I'm not going to invest yet. I'm not going to put my money in property because it's going to be a terrible crash. But of course, you can't actually predict it. A, you can't predict whether there is going to be a crash, and B, you can never predict when there is going to be a crash. So what do? Do you just sit there and sit on your pile of money, which is slowly depreciating? Even though we have low interest rates, we still have inflation. There is inflation still working to erode the value of that money. So do you sit on your pile of money and wait for the crash? Or do you say, actually, knowing the data in that area, knowing how the prices of property in that particular location, I've spotted something which is a bit of a bargain. I can get it because I've got negotiation skills. I can get it at maybe 20%, 25% discount. I'm going to put my money in there now. And there's always a risk that it might not be worth as much next year as it is worth where I buy it. But actually, you have made an investment. And for me, when you start investing in property, if you're doing it for cash flow, you're doing it for an investment, you have to be committed to it long term, because it's long term where you get the benefits. What do you think about that, David?
Well, I mean, property is, and not all investors realize this, property is by and large an illiquid asset. You can't just like selling shares in Enron or something. You need to dump them pretty quickly, but you can't do that with property. But having said that, on the other side of the coin, property has a great deal more value than Enron shares, particularly in the light of what happened with that particular company. But another thing, is that we can't. Last time I checked, we can't go to the bank and borrow 3/4 of the value of some shares in order to buy those shares. We could do that in the 1920s, and that's what caused the great crash of 29. But since then, that hasn't been a very popular thing anymore. And so when you go on these things called Money Week, which are very anti-property, poor fellas, and you'll see they do all these graphs and everything that sort of tend to show property and equities going up more or less neck and neck. But when you have to factor in the fact that we're principally buying these properties using borrowed money, and so that means that if you've bought a property for 100 and you borrowed 75, so you've only got 25 staked in that property. If that property goes up to 125, you've doubled your money. So that's another reason why property works as a much better investment than, like government bonds. You're lucky to see the purchasing power at the end of them that the money had when it went in. So why would you do that? Forex is all. I'm being a bit of a generalization here, and I am a bit biased, but with Forex, it all goes into the fees, and so even if it looks good on paper, it's all going to be swallowed up. If you invest in I'm being very negative today, aren't I? But really, but positive in terms of property. If you invest in a property fund, one of these city ones, you're going to be paying very, very high charges, and that compounds to reduce your effective return on it. So property, kind of at our sort of level, hands-on, is the way. And by all means, work with a partner to manage it and to acquire it and source it for you. But you're not going to be paying the fees you would to. I'm not going to mention any of these companies got a bit sued, but these big fund managers who have lots of expensive lunches, I don't really want to fund their lifestyle. You know what I mean?
I do, absolutely. And I agree. I think leverage is the key that really separates the asset classes. Property has this unique advantage that you can borrow money, you can get a mortgage. Now, I know for a lot of people at the moment, getting a mortgage is tricky, it's difficult. The restrictions have caused banks to be more cautious about lending. They're looking at the risk profile of the borrowers. We know that even if you're buying in a limited company, you have to give a personal guarantee very often for any lending that you're taking from that lender. So it's not as if it's not necessarily an easy strategy. And I think that people getting into property sometimes think that, this is going to be as easy as, I can just open an account and go and view a few properties, make an offer, and next week it'll be mine. And unfortunately, it is slower. It does take longer. It is more paperwork heavy than, let's say, just opening an online ISA and starting to buy some stocks and shares. You can do that in 1 hour. You can open an online account, and within an hour you can start to buy stocks and shares and see your money go up. And I've bought a few shares in companies over lockdown that have absolutely rocketed, and you could probably guess what some of those are. And that's great, but I have to use my own money to do it. Whereas with property, I can buy something and I can either choose to add some value immediately by renovating or by changing it into an HMO, for example. And a few months later, I can call up the bank and I can say, listen, could you come and revalue it? And they come out and go, Wendy, this is a beautiful property. We've never seen one so nice in this street before. We're going to give you not just the value that you paid for it or that you added to it in terms of the renovation cost. We're actually going to give you another 25, maybe even 30% higher. So I can end up then having a mortgage, which is 100% of everything that I had spent buying it, get all my money out and go again. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you don't achieve that, but there's the opportunity to achieve that. And this is, of course, where property then becomes an infinite return on your cash, because you haven't left any cash in the property. But I think that people, we've got to be careful that we don't just see the gold that glitters and think I can just get my pickaxe and get it out the ground. It takes a lot of hard work and effort to get there, but long term, it's very, very effective. But you know this as well, David. Do you have any thoughts on the commercial environment? Just finally, before we sort of finish for today, I'd like to kind of get your views on the high street and commercial property. Do you have any views about that?
Yes, we've still got 20 minutes to go, actually, because I'm
looking at the wrong clock. We have
to deliver a good 60 minutes for everybody. It's only fair. But yeah, let's touch on the world of commercial, and in fact, let's touch on how the world has changed forever in a lot of sectors of property. We'll start with commercial because that's the one you kicked off with here. Now, it's a very different world we're looking at now to the one at the beginning of March. And if you go down the high street now, I mean, the fact that different categories of Shopton, even Boris got confused the other day, didn't he, at the conference where he couldn't remember what was going on in the Northwest. And so how on earth are we as citizens be able to keep a track of something that's changing on an hourly basis where the penalties really aren't very great for not doing it? But I suppose that the overall message that we've got is that it's scary out there in the shops, and that affects their bottom lines. It really, really does. It's very, very frustrating for those running businesses. I realize that there are other aspects of commercial as well, and we'll touch on those in a minute, but I'm starting in the high street. These non-essential shops, which have been labelled in that way now by government, people are going to think, well, do I really need to buy that, I don't know, kettle deferring thing that goes in the kettle, which I had to do recently? But, did I go into the shop? No, I ordered it online. And this is a terrific boost for the likes of Mr. Bezos and Amazon and so forth. And it's really, here's the thing, going back to, as I am wont to do, going back to we'll go back to the Second World War, shall we? Just for the hell of it. That was a big event. Quite a big event, one that I'm glad we haven't repeated since, for obvious reasons. In the mid-1920s, there was this guy called Alexander Fleming, not Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond. Alexander Fleming had a piece of mouldy cheese, basically. The story is well known of how he looked at the edge of the cheese and thought, why does the mold stop? And then he discovers penicillin. But did he make penicillin? Did he scale this? No, he just stuck a bit of cheese on a shelf, and I bet it's very moldy by the time it's just dusted off 20 years later. 20 years later, the government revisited it together with that other university, not Cambridge, that other one, I can't quite remember the name. And they need, that's the one. They saw this need to scale this thing up because a lot of people were dying in the trenches and everything from diseases that were easily preventable if we could find out how the cheese mold stopped growing. So it was tricky, but my goodness, they pulled out all the stops like we're doing now with the COVID vaccine, and they made it happen. So my point is that times of crisis make sea changes, real huge changes that are going to affect our lives for years and years, decades to come thereafter, even when the original thing is gone. So some real big changes, I can't see them being rolled back, are going to happen as a result of COVID. And one of this is going to be the spread of online retail. Online retail was languishing in kind of single digits, and it kind of doubled just like that. And suddenly your online, your offline retailers, your Tesco's and your Asda's and your Sainsbury's, others are available, they found themselves unable to cope with it. And they just simply couldn't, because they had I think Tesco were the first online retailer, and they had a very, very outdated model, which was fine in like the 1990s when they started it, which is to have some bloke going around the shop with a shopping trolley, putting your shopping into it, and then it goes into bags, then it's loaded onto a lorry, and some other bloke has to deliver it. They've all got to do that for £5. So it's a kind of lost leader, and they just want us to go in there, buy the stuff, and burger off very quickly, and that's the model. So this online thing was a bit of a nuisance for them, and they sort of do it. And some of the retailers will do, when I have my shopping delivered, it's £1 because I do in the off-peak slots and all that kind of thing. And this is a lost leader. It's about getting market share. It's not about winning business. The margins are very, very, very tight. It's hard to see how they can make any money at all out of it. And then when the need came to scale up in March, whatever, April, they weren't able to do it. You had to be on some kind of a high risk register and all that. And I had to go to the shop and do the click and collect at that point. They said, oh no, we've been ordering us for years, but no, you're not high risk enough. So you've got to come in. Mr. Bezos saw an opportunity there, and he's been partnering up with people. He recently bought a firm that does driverless cars. So my thinking is that he's not going to go into head-to-head with Tesla because it's not his area. He's going to have self-powered, self-driving delivery trucks and drones. And I think I'm going to make a prediction here. We'll see whether this one is a bit better than the one I did in November. I predict by 2030, which is not that far away, we're going to have 60% share will be online. So that makes quite a big change to the high street, because we used to think that the high street would become, I don't know, nail bars, the hair salons, and coffee shops. Well, all of those things, the three things, are not really as popular as they have been. I went into a coffee shop, I think it was last week, with my friend Fiona, and we had a look round, and there were too many folks, and we were both kind of perspiring a little bit and getting a bit nervous. And we went across the road to this big steakhouse thing and had a coffee there, which it's another little David trick of how to conduct your life during lockdown. So these things are not necessarily the things to invest in at the moment. They're not necessarily the big growth areas in the high street. So we've seen this fantastic relaxation of planning by government, and that was absolutely and totally the right thing to do, because it will let the market decide how to repurpose those warehouse units, those high street units, and these things which they know that otherwise we're just going to have boarded up high streets with like in those Western movies where the gold rush town, where you see that brush rolling along the street and all that kind of thing. They've got to inject something in there, and it will bring in money for government. So it was a very, very good move. We're going to see the high street change in ways that couldn't have been imagined. We're going to see the out of town retail parks, which were, back in my day in the 70s and 80s, they were the death of the high street. We're going to see them repurposed into goodness knows what. I mean, that already happened pre-COVID and all that in the States. A lot of these big out-of-town malls were just being converted into, I don't know, big religious retreats or something, or golfing theme parks, or that already happened, because once the anchor tenant, once your Debenhams or whatever and other anchor tenants are available goes, all the little guys then exercise a break clause. Bang, these things are empty very, very quickly. And if you'd been, is it called Tuvid or something? This big owner of retail centers in something like that, I can't remember their name exactly, or U2 or something. They had things all around the country. There were about 20. They pulled the plug, and so investors in that kind of commercial property would be seriously worried now. So repurposing, and then we come to offices. That's a big one, isn't it? Now, there's a very big bank, very well-known bank, which has a lot of stuff in Northampton, which shut it when lockdown happened, and they say they have no immediate plans to reopen. And a lot of other big financial firms, Schroders, some of the other big high street banks and everything have said, if the staff like working from home. And I rang up HMRC yesterday, and I could hear a dog or something in the background, and I think that's a great thing. And your second biggest cost for businesses has been the floor space, isn't it? The square meterage, and nobody in the corporate world, because that's how it works, nobody's going to put their hand up in the boardroom and say, I've got this great idea, let's send everybody home. Think of the money we'll save, and their time on the board would be quite short-lived, and they'd be literally putting their necks on the line. Well, now, for whatever reason, because of pandemic, we've had to do this, and we found that the KPIs are better, and we found that people are more productive working from home, and we found we don't have to pay all that rent. So everybody's going to be looking at the break clauses in their commercial agreements and things. Those who did came back for about a week or something before Boris changed tack again and said, no, I think you should be at home. No, you work at home at work, and it's driving everybody insane. And it's kind of working. If you're sort of terribly gregarious, you'll have to find another way of meeting people. Sorry, because these working environments are not for the staff to have as a social club. They're there for the company to work productively. Hence, we had open plan offices and whatever. And open plan offices, not a very good idea in COVID. No. So it's great that we'll be able to repurpose all that commercial space. We won't see it all going to residential, because there simply aren't enough people in the UK to live in it all. So that's my take on the commercial side of it. I think. What's your thinking?
Well, I think it's true that we're going to see commercial buildings used differently. I think that's inevitable, partly because of social distancing. We're going to see coffee shops and so on going to have to adapt. I think it was Pret-a-Manger, I believe, or no, maybe it wasn't Pret. I can't remember. There was a well-known coffee chain, might have been Costa, who quite early on recognised that they were obviously not going to have any footfall because everybody was at home. So decided to do a delivery service. So you could order your coffee online and get it delivered. And I think they were doing 20 coffees a week or for £50 or something. So I do think the delivery model is a really interesting one. And as you say, I think we're going to see a lot more. We have seen a massive growth in online shopping and online retail. So that, let's think about the ramifications of that. Well, of course, if you're buying stuff online, whether it's unless it's coffee, but let's assume it's something that's less got less of a sort of sell by date or a minute sell by date, clothes, stuff for your house, cleaning materials, etc. That has to come from somewhere. So you're going to have warehouses. And in fact, I have a client who runs a very big Amazon business. He has his own warehouse and he's taken on larger warehousing space to hold all the items that he needs to be able to retail. So he buys at wholesale prices and then he retails them on Amazon and various other sites. And Amazon is not the only online shopping site, David. You can buy from other sites too. But he so I think that's going to be very interesting, that we might see some of these industrial parks growing, and I think possibly industrial sites are going to become bigger because we're going to need more storage. Now, obviously, a lot of stuff that we source at the moment we're a net importer in the UK, so that has an impact on the economy, of course, but it also has an impact in terms of where we buy our stuff from. Where do we get our raw materials from? Where do we buy our watering cans from, or our combs, or top? Where does this top come from? Well, it may well be made in India, and it's possibly then shipped to China, and then China does a bulk shipping to the UK, and then it gets distributed around the UK. So in terms of shipping, I think that is potentially going to be an area of the economy that actually increases, unless we in the UK start to manufacture more. Now, that would be great because we need to manufacture more. So I would also be looking, and this is probably more medium to long term, and this is what I would do if I was in government. I'd be looking at helping small businesses to set up, as I mentioned earlier, but I'd also be looking at supporting manufacturing, because manufacturing is a very defensive but also productive position to be in. And of course, you mentioned Japan earlier on. Well, you see, one of the strengths of Japan, of course, it is a massive manufacturing country. They're a net exporter, so they export more than they import. And so despite their challenges with their own economy over the last 20 years, the benefit they have had is that the yen has been a desired currency because people need it to buy their washing machines and dishwashers and VCRs, which no longer do they make, but whatever it is they make now, televisions. People want to buy those things. Now, the problem with the UK economy, of course, is that we're not a manufacturing economy anymore. And so I would like to see us develop more factories, more manufacturing. That, I think, is going to really be something that, if I was in government, that's what I would be putting my money on, because that is where we produce. And you also mentioned the fact that our gross domestic product, our turnover, if you like, as a country, has dipped down to, I think we lost something like 17 or 18% in 1 month, or maybe over the period that we were in lockdown. This will still not have gone back up to its normal levels. It can't have done because so many people are on furlough. So that has an impact on our growth as an economy. It has an impact on our debt and our leverage as an economy, and our risk rating as a country within the world global stage. And so therefore, how can we change that? And personally, I'd like to see people starting to say, well, okay, I might buy some cotton, I learned some, some dressmaking at school. I'm going to start to design some clothes and make some. I'm going to make something. I'm going to make some clothes to sell, because that is how people like Laura Ashley started. Laura Ashley was a real woman. She started by printing her own cotton in her farm in Wales and sold it to Liberty of London. And Liberty of London was so delighted with the cloth, they started making it up into hankies and napkins and simple things for the home. And this was, of course, in the 70s, I think late 70s, early 80s. And I mean, sadly, of course, Laura Ashley has now gone into administration. It's very sad. And this is, again, the capitalist boom and bust, unfortunately, that we have, but it's part of our system. But again, Laura Ashley was a manufacturing outlet. It made goods in the UK, it produced them, and it distributed them worldwide. So I'd love to see more of that happening. Now, what does that mean for property? Well, what it means for property is that we might start to see that where those manufacturing hubs, those manufacturing centres start to set up, people will move into those areas. So just as we saw in the 19th century, places like Lever, where Lever Brothers set up, Lord Lever set up Port Sunlight. I was struggling for the name there, which, by the way, if you ever get an opportunity to go, it's an absolutely fascinating place to visit. And the art, the Lever Art Gallery Lady Lever Art Gallery is second to none. Absolutely mind-blowing art, incredible. Anyway, that's another point. But the point is that he started by manufacturing soap. So his family ran a grocer's shop in Liverpool, I believe, or somewhere in Burnley, maybe Lancashire. And what they noticed was that they had to, every time somebody would come into the shop, there was a big lump of soap, and they would have to cut up the soap and wrap it up and give it to the customer. And Lord Lever, or Mr. Lever as he was then, realised that actually if he could produce ready-made chunks of soap and soap powder, and of course they developed lots more products, that this was a very effective way of selling, and it saved a lot of time, and it was direct to the customer. And over the next 50 years, his manufacturing business absolutely boomed. And not only did he create this wonderful business on the Wirral, which was, to this day, it's an international company, Lever Brothers, Unilever, as it is now. He created a lot of homes. So if you go to Port Sunlight, you'll see these houses that were created for the workers who worked in the factory, like Cadbury. Cadbury was exactly the same. They came from a Quaker background, so they very much believed in what they were doing in terms of chocolate production, because they didn't do coffee and tea because of the caffeine. So they did the chocolate production, and because of their philanthropy and their belief in trying to help the people who were producing these items, they produced this amazing Cadbury's village in Bourneville. And I mean, I'm not saying we should necessarily go back to that, David, but I do think that there is a sense in which sometimes manufacturing creates its own culture, it creates its own environment. And I think one of the things that many of us have missed over lockdown is face-to-face human contact. And, we're back in that semi-situation now. Thankfully, the schools are still operating, but apart from the schools being more normal, I noticed the streets, the traffic is less, which is actually a good thing, but it's indicative of the fact that we are in our homes more. So to me, manufacturing actually answers an awful lot of questions and risks that we might be running as a country. So long term, I think that's going to be very interesting for the property market as well, manufacturing. Then the other thing I was going to also just mention on that was, of course, the climate. Now, before COVID came along, one of the big issues or concerns, I suppose, was climate change. And, we recently, David Attenborough released his film about extinction, which is very, very powerful. And while not directly related to climate, it definitely there are some links there that the way that we as human beings have treated our planet has caused a lot of extinction. And part of that has obviously had an impact on the climate as well. Now, it's really interesting when we talk about online services, because what do online services depend on? They depend on transport. They depend on cars and vans and lorries going up and down the motorways and, going here, there and everywhere. And in fact, while we were on the call, I heard my front door go, there's a delivery waiting for me. Now, we know that, carbon and use of fossil fuels is not good long-term for the planet. So this, I think, is, again, another problem that is waiting to be solved. And I love the idea of using technology. Drones might be an option. There may be other ways in which we can overcome the changes that COVID has brought. And as you say, like a phoenix out of the ashes, there may be some opportunities here for entrepreneurs to develop and grow new technologies, which will be both friendly to the environment and friendly to us as human beings as well.
Totally agreed. I mean, that brings us exactly up to an hour, but would you like to go an extra 10 minutes? Because we touched on so much exciting stuff now. I'm easy on this, but there's a lot to talk about.
Well, David, I think you're probably the only person in the world who'd like me to talk for a further 10 minutes.
Let's do that. You've raised such a lot of things there. Now, interesting enough, my family had links with the other firm, Procter & Gamble. So, it's a small world, isn't it, really? And like, even today, you go into the supermarket and you see all this bewildering array of washing up powders and things, and it's just all made by those two companies with different labels, and that's a wonderful example of branding. But in terms of this world, well, do you know what? Yeah, last week I did, as I was wont to do, I went into the supermarket to buy some loo rolls, and what do you know? Empty shelves again, and astonishingly, so. The supply chain, which we've come to depend on, and I think this started with the American computer company Compaq in the 1980s, this just-in-time thing, which is very profitable for the big firms. You tell all your suppliers that they have to be located, 100 yards away from your front door or something, and you tell them you'll let them know the day before what you need, and so then all the burden of the cash flow burden is shifted to the supplier. They have to sort of be in charge of sort of predictive manufacturing, guessing how much you're going to require. They've got to store it. They've got all these overheads of that kind of thing. And our supermarket chains, they only have about 2 or 3 days worth of stuff in the entire system, and not all of it is perishable. But there just isn't. And you go into your big superstore, all the stuff is stored out back, but there isn't much out back. Most of it, that's just for unloading the lorries, and it goes straight onto the shelves and this kind of thing. So that's an extraordinary thing in a way of how the whole system is structured. And I think we're going to see some fundamental changes. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He was one of the 5-strong group that brought the Aldi supermarket to the UK. That's one we haven't mentioned yet. And he was saying that one of the things they didn't speak about is warehouses. They spoke about distribution centers, because the stuff isn't in there very long. It's constantly in flux. And the big problem that the deliverers have had now is now that we are moving inexorably towards getting the stuff online, because it's so easy to we're having a chat here while your shopping's arriving, so you're not otherwise I had to do it. You'd have been pushing your supermarket trolley, I'd have been pushing mine, and would have been holding our cameras, doing selfies. And so it's a very different world. It's very, very convenient. But these distribution centers have been built right across all the supermarkets. They've been built for huge lorries to come in and to take a whole supermarket's worth of goods and take it to the supermarket, where it's then put out on the shelves for the retail customers to buy. And at the same time, it's packaged up into little things and sent to consumers. This is this model needs an extraordinary shake-up for it to happen. But I think that's a historical model. We need to be in a sense, more like Amazon or whatever, but we also need to source stuff locally. During lockdown, there's a lovely street here in Mill Road, and next time you and your partner are up here, I'll give you a guided tour. It's called Mill Road. It's very sort of ethnic. It's all local shops, and nobody else gets a look in. And over lockdown, all the local shops got together to have people on mopeds and everything distributing all their stuff so that they could carry on trading. It was a wonderful model, and I think we're going to see localization. And it's time to talk about Star Trek. That thing with the pointy ears, live long and prosper. How do you do it? Live long and prosper, something like that. That's heavy metal, I think that one. Yeah, that's the one. Heavy metal is that one. So that's the one. So they used to have these machines where they'd press a button and suddenly a coffee cup would appear with coffee in it, and they'd drink it and all that sort of thing. Now, manufacturing is going through an absolute sea change, which it was going through anyway before COVID happened. And the cost of the stuff we make, the cost of things we do is going to come down by a factor of about 10. So your average American, to maintain their lifestyle by 2035, will be able to do this for $250 a month. Now, whether those cost savings will be passed on to the consumer or whether the fat cats will get fatter, it remains to be seen. But this is a huge change. And the kind of machines and things, 3D printing and all these kind of things, and making things at a sort of sub-molecular level. I mean, is it Burger King? One of these things has got a thing called the Imagine Burger now, which it oozes blood when you bite it and all this kind of thing, and it sizzles and whatever. But it's all grown from a test tube. And it's although the cost saving there hasn't been passed on to the consumer, it costs about 10 cents to make the bloody thing. So doesn't have the amount of impact. So we're going to see these huge changes. I mean, looking up at my roof, I've got some solar panels. I don't know about yours. And so increasingly, and Tesla's done some wonderful work on batteries. Increasingly, we're not going to have a national grid anymore. We're not going to have that stuff. Our homes will be self-contained in that thing, because the next generation of that tech that's going to be on our roofs will be 50 times more efficient than it is now. So we'll be driving electric vehicles. So time to sell those shares in the power companies. Sorry, fellas, because that won't be needed. And that's an extraordinary thing. We won't be having any new fossil fuel cars from, I think, is it 2030? So all change, which is good. And that will bring the focus back to communities. I think for now, each town will have its own replicator or something where you can go and get anything. You can print a house or whatever it might be, literally, which will be kind of standard construction-ish. I mean, now they're a bit crude, those things, but those technologies over the next 10, 15 years are really going to come to the fore. And so we won't have this sort of global trading anymore. And I think that's a wonderful thing for the environment, because we won't have all these freighters going around and so I see rosy times ahead. And sort of the final thing I'd like to come back to today is some residential housing. What are your thoughts on that moving forward? Or shall I give you my thoughts first? And I don't know.
No, I'm sort of happy to share, David. Obviously, I keep a very keen eye on the residential property market, and particularly what people ask me about is HMOs, of course, which is the thing that I probably talk about more and think about more than probably any other type of housing. And what do I think is the outlook for HMOs and I suppose other residential property? So maybe if I just talk about that first, is that okay? So yes, HMOs, obviously they're a sort of unique kind of asset class, because you're talking about various different members of these different individuals are counted as their own individual household. So you've got 5, 6, 7 individual households in one household. And they go out to work, or they might be staying in it, working from home. And they've got to find a way through this to live together and happily coexist. And what we tend to see with people who are living in HMOs is that many of them are single individuals. They don't have a family. They're not married. Some of them might have a partner who lives somewhere else. Many of them are living in an HMO for work purposes, although for some of them it's also because of leisure and friends and family, and or maybe it might be an area they've grown up in, but they've left home and now this is their sort of first step onto maybe getting their own accommodation. But what's been really interesting for us over COVID is kind of looking at some of the trends. First of all, we've seen an upward trend in demand in our area. So we invest in Stoke-on-Trent and Crewe in South Cheshire, both very working class areas, fairly industrial. Crewe is going to be the hub for HS2. And we've started to see a little bit of signs of life of that happening slowly, but there's things happening there. Stoke, obviously, it's got a very big pottery manufacturing history. Now it's more Bet365 is there. The country's most wealthy woman lives just down the road from us. So yeah, now it's betting, and we have various call centres, and there's actually there's a very large teaching hospital there as well. So the type of tenants that we have hasn't really altered particularly. A lot of them are blue collar, some white collar workers. But we're finding that the demand for living in HMOs has actually increased, which has been very interesting to us. So We've seen more people actually decide they were living in the area already, so they're not necessarily moving into the area. Now, again, a year ago, 18 months ago, we saw more of that. But I think with Brexit on the horizon, we may be seeing that reducing slightly. So I think that's more to do with Brexit than it is to do with COVID. But what we are seeing is people who have lived in flats or lived alone in a house, and actually they've become very isolated. They've felt lonely. Their mental health has been somewhat affected, and they actually want to live in a nice shared house. Now, admittedly, you know, we're not talking about shared houses that we might have seen in the 1980s and the young ones. You know, we're talking about nice properties that are refurbished to a really nice standard. They often have en suites. They might have a kettle, maybe a little mini fridge in their own bedroom, or they might put them in if there isn't one there already. So the accommodation is of a high standard to start with. That's always attractive for people. But secondly, the fact that there are all-inclusive bills. I think that at this time, you know, people are looking for convenience. You mentioned this earlier with shopping. And I think this is true of living, that we are becoming more of a nation that wants convenience when it comes to living. So offering a one price for the whole month that includes all your bills plus a cleaner every couple of weeks, this is actually what suits people, because it means they're not having to sign up to council tax. They don't have to set up a direct debit for the electricity and the gas and all the other utilities. And it's much, much easier for them to live in those kind of environments. So I think from that point of view, HMOs has really got a lot to offer. And I think that people who maybe have dismissed them because they see them as a lot of extra work, which they're definitely more work than, let's say, a single buy-to-let. But of course, there's more profit in it as well. So you can always employ somebody who could help you to run the business, which is what we do. So I actually think there's going to be a huge amount of future possibility with HMOs. I think we're just maybe beginning to enter a slightly new phase with HMOs, where the more the better refurbed ones, the higher quality ones are going to really be the preferred option for a lot of people, and making it easy for people to move in. I mean, the biggest flat sharing website, which is Spare Room, indicates that most people who are looking to move into an HMO are looking within 1 week. They want to move, you know, today's Thursday, they want to be in their new home by next Thursday. They want a quick turnaround. Now, in the buy-to-let market, it's much slower than that. Usually people are looking within a month. They'd like to find somewhere to move to. They then give notice to their current landlord. That might be a month, and then they will move. So the speed of transaction is much faster in an HMO than it is in a single buy-to-let. And that in itself reflects a bit more about, if you like, some of the speed of other transactions that are taking place in our daily lives, such as shopping, deliveries, and so on. We've got used to things being a bit more instantaneous. And I think HMOs actually reflect that mindset of people, that they make a decision, they want it now. In terms of the residential property market, well, again, we're looking at statistics recently from various different sources. The letting market is buoyant. More and more people are looking to rent properties. And again, I suspect some of that has come from people deciding that they don't want the current property that they maybe owned. So again, what I spoke to an estate agent yesterday, and he said that he's got quite a few contacts or customers, I suppose, who have decided to sell their main property, release some capital from that property and invest in rental. And they themselves are now moving into rental property because the rental property gives them more flexibility. Maybe it's got a garden or it's got a home office, which their owned property didn't have. So again, it's a very interesting way of life that people are realizing that to utilize capital wisely, they don't necessarily want it tied up in their main family home anymore, which again, I think is going to become a growing trend.
A fascinating insight, and it's great to see so many people watching today. And hello, and thank you to everybody for joining us. And I mean, not too much to add to that really, except that people's requirements are changing. You don't need to live in a tiny studio flat in central London anymore because you're working from home. And the reason you were living there before is because so you could walk across the street to your place of work. And so that's a big shift. And having been locked down to the point of insanity, and sorry for those noises, I don't know whose computer they're on, but anyway, never mind, please ignore them. It's okay. It's just not a problem. You don't anymore need to be located close to work. And I think that's something that's likely to continue because companies looking at their bottom line have realized that you don't need the employees all the time. And when you do have them in, you can take them to a coffee house for the afternoon or something and just sit around a table. You know, in many cases, there are obviously some hands-on businesses, but, you know, even I was having a chat about this to a friend of mine who's a futurologist the other day. And I said, we'll always need bin men. And he said, well, funny you should mention that because, you know, with our 5G connected world, 5G is a very responsive technology, and it's nothing to do with COVID or anything like that, all that nonsense that people have been spouting. But what it will enable you to do is you'll have one guy sitting in HQ controlling 20 bin lorries and dealing with any issues that turn up, and there'll be no crew. And so these are very, very big changes. So and eventually, there's no reason why he won't be sitting in so these things about. Time is pressing now, but we're just to sort of wrap it very, very quickly. Let's continue our chat because this was a fascinating chat. We've got loads of people watching today. It was terrific, and I'm very honoured to have been invited, Wendy. Let's continue this chat sometime soon because it's going into lots of very exciting areas.
Absolutely, David. I could chat to you for a long time. There's so many things that I love to get your opinion on different things. There's things about the economy that I could talk about forever. We haven't even touched on inflation, which is my big topic of the moment, but we'll do that another time. So you know, it's been absolutely great to connect with you. And this is, of course, where technology does have the edge, doesn't it? 10 years ago, we couldn't have done this. So you know, thanks to technology, we're able to meet virtually today.
Do stay on the line, Wendy, but thank you everybody for watching. We're switching the live off now, so thank you so much.
Thank you.